We begin this morning with new nationwide fallout after an ICE officer shot and killed a Minnesota mother. Protesters took to the streets yesterday in several major cities across the country, including Boston, New York, and Minneapolis, with more demonstrations expected this afternoon. Listen to what some of the protesters had to say.
What we're looking for is to remove the ICE agents that are not following the law. They have not been trained. They are not equipped. They're not like our police officers or our armed forces.
ICE is conducting a reign of terror in American cities that is violence against hard-working immigrants and now just American citizens trying to defend people in their community. It's a reign of terror. It's got to stop.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration continues to push its own narrative, doubling down on its argument that the ICE officer who killed Renee Good was acting in self-defense. Minnesota officials who've been cut off from the FBI from key evidence in that case reject that narrative. Even as those officials push back, the administration is also working hard to villainize the shooting victim. Case in point, yesterday on X, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt posted, quote, "This woman was not an innocent mother dropping her kid off at school. She was a leftist insurrectionist who was purposefully and illegally obstructing law enforcement operations." And she later shared a video released by the Department of Homeland Security that appeared to show Good's car partially blocking traffic in the moments leading up to the shooting. Joining us now, Eugene Robinson, MS Now political analyst and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, and Christopher O'Leary, former FBI special agent and senior counterterrorism official. He is also an MS Now national security and intelligence analyst. Fellows, thank you for joining us at the table so early this morning. Christopher, I want to start with you. When we are looking at the series of extraordinary events that happened over the last few days, can you spell out the biggest red flags for you that have happened along the way?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that, one of which has been a trend that's been building is the militarization of DHS and the culture of using force as a standard in their enforcement operations, which is a vast departure from the way they've conducted themselves over the years. And I have many ICE and Border Patrol agents that I've worked closely with, and they're mortified at what they're seeing. And it's somewhat like the Stanford, prison guard experiment gone wrong at scale, that this has been normalized. And I think it's important to note that the overwhelming majority of ICE operations and DHS immigration operations are done on civil warrants, administrative warrants. It's supposed to limit the amount of force that's used. They don't have the authority to forcibly enter a place. They don't have probable cause to arrest U.S. citizens who may be in the vicinity. So the question is, with this incident, what was the victim doing? What was this woman doing that they believed was so egregious that they needed to take these furtive steps to not only surround her car, but then use deadly force? And were they perceiving her as the enemy, them, instead of looking at her as a fellow citizen and trying to use the minimum amount of force necessary? If she was blocking the road, again, having been in enforcement operations across this country and around the world, it's alarming to me to see this escalate that quickly. And I understand that the officer involved had been dragged by a car before, so I don't want to be overly critical. You have to let the investigation play out. And if the investigation was allowed to play out in normal times, I would have every confidence that the agents of the FBI Minneapolis field office, where I served for a number of years, would do dragnet, just the facts. They would actually have a good investigation, and they'd present it to the local prosecutor for a review, and they'd come up with a determination.
I take it you are not confident that the FBI is going to
when under the leadership, and I say that with like serious air quotes, of Kash Patel, and then with DOJ and the White House already trying to influence this investigation, we're in the era of alternative facts, and it erodes the trust and confidence in institutions across the U.S. government and certainly in the FBI.
Eugene first, Eugene. I'll be second, Eugene. One of the things that has been, I think, most disturbing is the American president, vice president, their team, the people that work for them, not just going out front and trying to create this narrative, but calling this woman names as if, even if she were those things, and there's no evidence that she was, even if she was deranged leftist or a leftist extremist, those are not crimes in which in this country you are put to death. Right? And so, when you are looking at the way that they're talking about this woman who is dead, and there's an investigation, maybe, a good one that might come out of this, so we might know more who this woman is. But what do you think they're actually trying to do here?
It's propaganda. It's they're telling lies toward a political end, and I think they fear that the killing of a U.S. citizen in this manner on video, as everybody saw, would continue to shift public opinion against what ICE is doing. And so what was striking to me, and frankly, to me, reprehensible, I'm an opinion guy, I could just say flat out, utterly reprehensible, was the way J.D. Vance, for example, came out immediately and not just blamed the victim, but insisted on this narrative of Renee Good essentially trying to kill this officer, and this officer having to act in self-defense. And, regardless of what the video actually shows, when they released the cell phone, the officer's video yesterday, again, the video shows her turning the wheel sharply to the right in an obvious attempt to just get out of the way, yet the White House is maintaining that it shows something else. And you know what?
That's some kind of intent.
Exactly. Yeah. And it made me think of you guys remember the Springfield, Ohio cats and dogs?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thing? Right. Okay. Yeah. Right. And so, it was being pushed hard by J.D. Vance and by President or then candidate Trump, it was totally debunked, including by me. I went to Springfield. I talked to the mayor. This is not happening. And when confronted with the facts, J.D. Vance stuck with the story. And what he said was, if I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do. That's what he's doing.
Yes.
He's creating a story.
Right.
And he's pushing the story in a way that's, you would expect from Soviet Russia. You wouldn't expect from the United States.
Or a poster on the internet.
You know what this reminds me of? The administration's effort to get out ahead of everything is the Mueller report, and how Bill Barr came out and said, here's what the report says. And then the report was released 3 days later and was completely different.
It's not what Bill Barr said.
It's not what Bill Barr said, but the narrative had been set.
Exactly.
And, Christopher, the thing that has, so many things about this have enraged me, but two things in particular. The cell phone video of the shooter, of the ICE officer. How is it possible that he could have a cell phone in one hand and a gun in the other? And how is that even procedure? But more importantly, why is the administration, or how did that video get out to the public? How is it that the administration is releasing other videos to push their narrative when they're also investigating this crime? I know that's a legal term, but investigating this. How are the American people supposed to trust at all what comes out of this administration now, and what could come out of the investigation if there is a report that comes out? Because it seems to me they don't care. There's going to be no report, as would happen in a normal Justice Department.
I think he highlighted it's propaganda. I mean, it's setting the narrative. and it's not the facts of the investigation, which is problematic. But what the investigator should be looking at, and what I would be looking at, is did these officers conduct themselves reasonably, which is kind of the foundation for U.S. law.
Reasonable to whom?
Objectively reasonable. So for an average citizen giving this set of facts, would that person perceive this as an objective, reasonable decision? So what led them to that car? And I'm looking at the video. This is civil disobedience. This is not domestic terrorism. Somebody who's studied and worked counterterrorism operations for decades, I can tell you authoritatively, this is not domestic terrorism. And it's certainly not the days of rage from the late 60s and 70s. So what brought them to that car? They didn't like being filmed. And then what brought them to surround the car and use deadly force
and yell at the woman
and also violate ICE policy? The way they approached the car was outside of policy. Yeah. Shooting at a fleeing vehicle was outside of ICE policy. So at the very least, there should be administrative actions within DHS. But also blocking out the state and local investigators is problematic for a variety of reasons, but also practically. The FBI and other federal agencies are relatively small. They do it through partnerships. They affect their operations through partnerships. Since the foundation of the FBI in 1908, you build partnerships and task forces.
And now we're going to dig a little deeper into why the murder of Renee Nicole Good is resonating across that community. For years, the city has felt the impact of political violence, police brutality, and gun violence. In 2015, 2 police officers shot and killed an unarmed man, Jamar Clark, sparking days of protest across the city. A year later, protests again erupted after video showed a police officer shoot and kill Philando Castile during a traffic stop with his girlfriend and her 4-year-old daughter watching inside the car. Then in 2020, the world saw police officer Derek Chauvin forcefully kneel on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes, killing him. Floyd's death triggered massive protest across the country. In June 2025, a person impersonating law enforcement murdered State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband in their home. And 2 months later, in August, a gunman killed 2 young children and wounded 17 others as they were praying during a school-wide morning mass. Now, just 2 weeks into 2026, the community is grappling with the fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Good, as well as the Trump administration's ongoing immigration crackdown. Joining us now is Minnesota State Representative Aisha Gomez. She represents the district where Renee Good lived and was killed, and Michelle Norris, MS Now senior contributing editor. Michelle, we're going to start with you because you grew up in Minneapolis, and clearly this city has gone through so much over the recent years. What are you hearing from the community about how they're responding to this latest tragedy?
I'm here at Powderhorn Park, which is just a little bit east of where Renee Nicole Good was killed. There were thousands of people. The park's pretty quiet right now, but just an hour ago, there were thousands of people here who braved the cold temperatures and the flurries because Minnesotans are used to the cold, but sadly, as you noted in your introduction, they're also used to protests that follow aggressive police activity. And a lot of the people who came out today were, yes, mourning the death that happened on the 3400 block of Portland Avenue, but they're also here to try to defend a way of life. Many of the people who were involved in the protests felt like they're trying to protect the idea of democracy, protect the idea of safety. A lot of people said that they were here to protect their neighbors and to defend their neighbors and look out for their neighbors. And when you heard them talk, you think, does everybody have an immigrant that lives next door to them? No, it's more of a point of view in Minnesota, a way of seeing the world that you're part of a community and you look out for your neighbors. Just to put a fine point on the numbers here, Senator Klobuchar noted earlier today that there are so many immigration enforcement officers here now in the state that the number in the cities outnumbers the police force, the combined police force in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And what people are seeing is a much more aggressive brand of immigration enforcement. Minnesota's a border state. Canada's just north. So border patrols have been here before, but they've never seen this kind of aggressive policing. Men wearing camouflage, snatching people off the streets, and in some cases engaging with the monitors, the people that are following them to monitor their activity in a very aggressive way, sometimes carrying AR guns that carry pepper pellets and firing them at very close range. There's a very, very aggressive brand of immigration enforcement that people are not comfortable with. And so they're very worried about the way of life, and they're very worried about what will happen if the protests continue and if they do not remain forceful. We're now in several nights of protests. You've seen what happened last night where people were protesting outside where some of the immigration agents were staying. It was a little bit rowdy, it was a little bit loud, but it was relatively peaceful. And every time when the sun falls, people are worried that their prayers for peace might not be answered. There are outside agitators that come in. That's what they saw after the death of George Floyd, not far from here. And the city was inflamed, and they do not want to see that again.
Representative Gomez, obviously we are seeing an outpouring of grief and anger at what is happening in your city and in the Twin Cities more broadly. What are your constituents asking leaders like you to do on their behalf to keep them safe?
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. You talked and Michelle talked, really clearly about, about the feelings here, about the experiences that we've been through, and about the community that we have and that we love so much and we're fighting to defend. And so, my constituents, we're a citizen legislature. My constituents expect of me, right relationship with community and, to show up in hard times in all of the ways that I can. And I and others are in leadership positions are certainly trying to do that. These are unprecedented times. I mean, we have a U.S. citizen being murdered in the middle of the street. These masked, unidentified secret agents who have basically invaded our city, who are intimidating, business owners, just regular people going about their life. They prevented a doctor from coming and even rendering basic medical care to Renee as she lay bleeding out in the streets. They blocked ambulances from coming and rendering basic medical care to her. If you saw the new video yesterday or the day before from the perspective of the officer, you heard somebody on that call her an effing bitch after she was shot in the face 3 times. In the United States of America with no crime, no trial, no nothing. And so, I think that our country just truly is in a state of emergency. And that's what I'm hearing from my constituents is we are in an emergency. And that's why people are out in the street. And that's why that's why people are continuing to do the work that Renee was doing to protect our neighbors amidst this major escalation. I mean, they went and pepper sprayed kids at a high school dismissal right after they went from the murder scene to go to a high school dismissal to pepper spray kids and educators and parents as they were trying to get home from school. They're in hospitals. They are violating even our spaces that should be safe for our students, for people seeking medical care. I mean, it's unprecedented times, it feels like.
Yeah, Michelle, to Representative Gomez's point, there is such a dehumanization taking place, and we don't know if they were saying that effing terminology about her, Renee Good, or about the woman that was also there that was trying to enter the vehicle, because the language of dehumanization is just so prevalent in everything that they are doing, talking about Somalis as garbage, Mexicans as rapists and criminals. And I wanted to play for you this soundbite from the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, just today. Take a listen.
That is the massive escalation of this administration against our state, the state of Minnesota, as they have done in Illinois, Portland, and Los Angeles. This massive escalation, telling these agents that Somali people are garbage, saying that Mexican Americans are rapists and drug dealers, saying all these hateful things is is the policy reason why Renee Good is dead.
Some very strong words there, Michelle, from the Attorney General about how the rhetoric and the dehumanization, as we open the show with tonight, advertisements to recruit, evoking some of the worst rhetoric this country has ever seen. And it leads to the deadly consequences that we see playing out on the streets.
You know, language is so important right now. Language can bring people together. It is how we can find each other. It is also how we can divide each other. And we're hearing the language of division right now. And if you're listening to the way people are talking about this and the sound bites from state officials and the sound bites from people who showed up here today, it's the language of war also. You know, people are talking about this as an invasion, as an occupation. This really is a state of emergency, and it feels like we are very much in a tinderbox. You know, America is a very diverse country. Immigration is something that we do have to deal with, but I don't think that, you know, even the people who supported immigration reform, it will be interesting to see what the polls show soon about this, whether they actually condone what they're seeing here. And I spoke to Attorney General Ellison earlier here at Powderhorn, and one of the things that he said is that people watching this may be watching this right now in the comfort of their living room or in their kitchen or wherever they happen to be, and they may think, well, that's just happening in Minnesota, it doesn't impact me here. They're clearly using this as the federal government, the Trump administration, is clearly using this as a training ground for militaristic action. And they won't stop here. We've seen it in Los Angeles. We've seen it in Illinois. We're now seeing it in Minnesota. And it won't stop here. It will move someplace else. And one of the things that the people of Minnesota and the officials of Minnesota seem to understand in every conversation that I've had is that this is being used as a training ground for militaristic action. They are trying to use this as a proving ground to show that there are ways to peacefully stand up to that, to peacefully confront that, to peacefully perhaps push back against this idea and to create something that is a little bit more sane, a little bit more humane. But, Eamon, you're absolutely right. The language that is being used right now is a way to stoke the idea that you are to fear someone who doesn't look like you, to fear someone who maybe came from another country. And in a place like America, that's particularly interesting. I just want to make one other point, though. This happened on January 7th. And when you're talking about the language of tyranny, we should remember the language that was used around January 6th, 5 years ago. And, you know, the kids talk about 6-7. It's interesting to me that the 6th and the 7th, the January 6th, January 7th, these two dates will forever be tethered in a really interesting way that I think we're going to be examining for a very long time in looking at the ways that the narrative has been shaped to suit the people in power. And how people who live closer to the ground have to figure out how to push back against that, to hold on to some semblance of sanity and democracy and humanity in America.
To that point that Michelle brings up about narrative and the sort of shaping of the facts on the ground, Representative Gomez, I want to ask you quickly, in addition to new video from the officer's perspective, there is new video released by DHS taken by a bystander that they claim shows that Nicole Good was, quote, stalking agents on the ground. And I'm wondering if you can respond to that claim, the way that you've seen the administration. You know, on the one hand, they're claiming that there is going to be an independent federal investigation here. On the other hand, the White House, the DHS coming out and basically saying, well, actually, the investigation's over because we've already cleared this person of any wrongdoing. And we're saying that time and time again in public now. What do you make of the way that they're developing this argument and crafting a narrative around this woman?
Well, I mean, the federal government has just demonstrated over and over again that they cannot be trusted, that they're not interested in the rule of law, that they're not interested in the truth. I haven't seen the latest propaganda video from DHS. I don't care to. I don't believe that it's going to make me mistrust the evidence that I have seen with my own eyes, that I have heard from the mouths of my just incredibly distressed and traumatized constituents who watched a masked federal agent execute someone in their street in the morning, during the morning commute. You know, I think that Michelle makes some very important points about this being a proving ground, and it's not just about the accelerated militarized tactics of these secret police. I believe that it's bigger than that. I believe that our democracy is being tested right now. does due process exist in our country anymore? Does a person who's accused of a crime have the right, guaranteed under the Constitution, to answer their accusers, or are they going to be executed in the street? I mean, that's what is literally in front of us right now. It's very serious and dark times in Minneapolis and for us as a nation.
Minnesota State Representative Aisha Gomez and Michelle Norris, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Joining me, we have Rob D'Amico, former FBI supervisor, former member of FBI's hostage rescue team, and national security and intelligence analyst for MS Now. Joined by Amy Sweezy, former assistant Hennepin County prosecutor, now law professor at the University of Minnesota. Hey, Rob, just give me a quick comment on what you see unfolding there, this kind of thing that erupts out of natural emotion, frustration, anger, however you want to describe it. It's not a sanctioned protest. It doesn't have organizers. Most of those we have seen be incredibly calm. There was commentary that one that grew to about the size of 1,000, or I believe it was 2,000 people in Minneapolis yesterday. There was one arrest out of the whole thing. So does what you see there worry you that it can escalate?
It can always escalate. It can be one event that triggers something, and that's my worry. I'm not for a bunch of violent protesting. I'm glad it's been peaceful on both sides. They're showing some restraint I think on each side. I don't like to see violent protests, but the country's been built on protesting when you feel that the government's doing things that aren't just, and people need to vent that. I think venting it, getting out and doing it actually helps people so they don't do other things. I have kids that protest, and I worry always about them doing something or being caught in something that triggers it, or them doing something that justifies law enforcement to do something else. So it's always a tense time. And literally, it's usually one event. It's one person that had a bad day that does something, and it triggers somebody else, and then it spirals.
Which may be happening right now. Those photos we were just seeing, that video, we see somebody being arrested. So I obviously believe somebody did some kind of action that weren't being arrested. Let me get specifically to Wednesday, Rob, and with you as well, Amy, with regard to the killing of Renee Good. What is your sense of the videos and all these different various angles and how they're being interpreted, Rob? And can you discern the actual sequence of events from what you have watched?
It's always tough. And I always hate to do it from back here when you don't have anything, especially the day of when I was on and commenting from what I saw. But what upset me was that the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Vice President, and the President within hours said it was justified. And I thought at that point, like, wait a second. As an agent, I never had the agency head and Vice President and President defending me as my lawyers hours after an incident. It was always like, hey, let's see what the investigation does. Now, I look at it. I've done so many arrests that I think 75% of them, I probably could have used deadly force and justified it by, I didn't know if he was going for a weapon. I thought he was doing this. And I let it play out to a point where I felt like I really had to do something at the last minute. When you're looking at this, and what gets me is this video that they show from the ICE agent, the people think that justifies that he was run over. And actually it doesn't. I think, one, it shows that she was calm. She says, I'm not mad at you. And then the other part, when they're about to get to it, you can see the front of the car. She's turning the wheel away from him. And what happens at the end where they're saying he was run over, his phone fell out. And if you look at the other videos, when he's going around the car, he has the phone in his left hand. He draws his weapon with his right hand, and then he has both hands on his weapon. So he dropped the phone. It might have got hit by the car, but I really don't see him being hit by the car. Now, there's other circumstances. He was dragged by a car and injured before. That goes into a line of duty investigation where other people make that determination. It's not just an hour after. You have to look at everything. And I think that's where the normalcy of how this is done, saying a review board finds him not justified, how are you going to even come out with it when the Secretary, the Vice President, and President already said it was?
You know, can I ask you, Rob, the fact that he was involved in that prior altercation, and I believe he was dragged about 100 feet, naturally, he would have some concern. I'm not going to speak about the situation and the details of what happened to lead to that one. But in the aftermath, does ICE have anything like a internal affairs? I don't know what the actual nomenclature, the actual division would be, just to look at him and say, guess what? We think you need to be taken off the street. Let's put you in a patrol car. Let's put you on a pedestrian duty, walking the streets. Did they miss the boat there by putting him back out in the field to be on a street, working with cars, just like the environment in which he had that experience before?
I don't know if they have a process. I do know, even the Bureau has some psychology, some apparatus that you go through that. I remember when I was doing undercover, I had to take a test every 6 months to see if I had a lot of anger issues or if I had stress that was undue, and they would actually pull me out of the undercover op. So there is normally agency processes when you have some type of injury, and I don't know if Homeland Security does. I don't know what the results of it were, if he went through it. I do know people that have gotten injured and they're back out on the street very, quickly after, but I don't know exactly what their process is, and I think it has to be looked at.
Yeah. Amy, the Hennepin County attorney is asking the public for evidence. They're asking witnesses, please send videos, any other evidence, send it directly to the county. Is that going to be enough to make a strong local or state case? And can it make up for the official evidence that the county does not have access to because the federal government is keeping its hands on it?
Well, thank you for having me, Alex. I appreciate being with you. I can certainly understand why the Hennepin County Attorney and the Attorney General have made that request to get evidence from members of the community who may have it. But I think it's unlikely that that will be sufficient to round out what really needs to be a full investigation here. And as you point out, it sounds like local prosecutors are not going to have access to at least some of the evidence that's been collected by federal authorities. I note that it's interesting that the video that was evidently taken with Agent Ross's cell phone is evidence that was collected and obtained, and that it sounds like the federal government did share that evidence, at least publicly. So we don't know if there'll be any other evidence that they will share. But in cases like this, which are very challenging anyway, it's unfortunate for local prosecutors that it doesn't look like they're going to have access to everything that they probably need to make an informed charging decision here.
Amy, you told the New York Times that prosecuting a police officer for use of deadly force is among the most challenging types of cases for prosecutors, even when evidence is widely shared. You've worked on similar cases in Hennepin County. What makes them so difficult?
Well, a few things make them difficult. First, legally, they're challenging because unlike ordinary civilians, except in very limited circumstances, ordinary citizens aren't allowed to use force or deadly force in encounters with citizens. And police, of course, are authorized to do that. And in Minnesota, we have a state statute that authorizes that and then limits it in terms of what is reasonable. So a prosecutor, in bringing a case against a police officer, has to not only prove the elements of whatever crime she decides to charge, perhaps a homicide crime or an assault crime, the prosecutor then has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that use of force was excessive or specifically unreasonable under the circumstances. And we know that although prosecutors have gotten better, I would say in the last 10 years or so, in bringing these cases and obtaining convictions, it can still be a very heavy lift for jurors to convict officers. There was, in the case involving Tyree Nichols in Memphis last year, there were some rather sweeping acquittals that I think surprised people who had an impression about the strength of that case in the early stages of it. So
Indeed,
all of those are things that make it difficult.
Okay. Amy Sweezy, Rob D'Amico, thank you both for getting us through this bit of the conversation. Appreciate you.
Yesterday, tens of thousands of people marched through Minneapolis to protest the ICE shooting of Renee Good. It was one of more than 1,000 rallies planned nationwide this weekend, but community members have been practicing another form of resistance as well. Know Your Rights training sessions to inform immigrants and allies of immigrants of their constitutional rights have become commonplace. Church basements, libraries, and community centers have become gathering places where immigrants prepare for the reality that their lives may be upended at a moment's notice. They fill out forms to designate caretakers. They memorize phone numbers. They save money for potential attorney's fees. They organize their documents. At these trainings, immigration advocates teach community members how to interact with ICE agents, to properly document ICE activities, and how to show up as observers and potentially intervene as immigration raids unfold. A tactic that's become commonplace is to blow whistles and honk car horns to alert the area that ICE officers are present. Just before the shooting death of Renee Good, the sound of whistles filled the air. You can hear in this video bystanders, including one whom we believe to be Renee Good's wife, blowing whistles to alert the neighborhood to ICE's presence. In videos from across the country, from Los Angeles to Memphis to Chicago, that whistle sound can be heard consistently. Blowing a whistle at a federal officer, it's not illegal. Filming a federal officer from a public space or in a public space is not illegal. Peacefully protesting ICE actions is not only not illegal, it's constitutionally protected activity. These should be safe legal practices. In a written statement provided to Minnesota Public Radio, Becca Good, Renee Good's wife, said, quote, "On Wednesday, January 7th, we stopped to support our neighbors. We had whistles. They had guns." Joining me now in Minnesota is the Democratic State Representative Aisha Gomez. Her district includes parts of South Minneapolis. Representative Gomez, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. You've been at these locations where ICE agents are staged. You've had a whistle yourself. You've had firsthand interactions with ICE during your advocacy efforts. Bring us up to speed on what these tactics involve and how they work.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, you covered it. We live in a democracy. We have a constitution that protects us when we are going about our days. We are allowed to peaceably assemble. We are allowed to use the public roadways. We are allowed to petition our government for the redress of grievances. I've been wearing my whistle, like many people in my community, for the last 5 weeks, as we have basically been invaded by secret police who are masked, who have no accountability to this community. We have no idea who these people are. And so, you know, you talked about it. The thing is that when I just feel so strongly, Velshi, that we are in a critical moment for our country, for our democracy. And I personally am, and the community that I'm a part of, we are committed to showing up for our neighbors and showing up for each other. And so the sound of whistles and horns in my part of town in Minneapolis has become this siren sound. You go running when you hear these things. And, you know, I would just encourage every community across this country. We weren't expecting this. We weren't expecting thousands of violent, heavily armed, masked agents to come and execute our community members in the streets, to shoot her in her face through a window, through a windshield. I mean, nobody could expect this. But the thing is that in the face of an authoritarian threat, that is what we are seeing. This is an authoritarian regime on the march. They are using tactics of intimidation and violence and murder, right? Extrajudicial murder in the streets in order to try to control us and in order to try to scare us. And we are called on to be courageous in the face of that threat.
So there are two things that my viewers can think about doing. One is the very specific activities that you're talking about, where you go and you participate, you get these trainings, you have whistles, you record things on your phone. It was very helpful that there was a lot of video from Wednesday so that one could refute the accounts that were coming out of the government. The other side is that you had an estimated 10,000 people peacefully protesting last night in Minneapolis and about 1,000 different protests across the country. We remember what those No Kings protests were. There is a way to indicate your dissatisfaction, your anger at what is going on. The administration would like to say these are lunatic, left-wing, radical, violent Antifa protests, and they just aren't.
Just aren't. And the thing is that, you know, this is patriotic Americans have always stood up in this way. This is a part of our history in this country, is that when we have mechanisms in place, the people who founded this country, right, as flawed as the execution of this has been, and as much as we can offer our criticisms and help to move this country toward those ideals, right, of equality and under the law, there are mechanisms literally in the architecture of our country that anticipated tyrants like President Trump and the people who are running our government, and gave the people. The government of the people, by the people, and for the people is imbued with tools for the people to stand up in these cases. And it is incumbent on all of us to do that in these times. I mean, it is our obligation. And I just think that our grandkids and great-grandkids are going to be asking us what we were doing in this time.
Right, and whatever that is, because that might be different for different people, for a state representative, for somebody for anybody, it might be different. But the answer to your grandchildren cannot be nothing.
That's right. That's right. And so, you know, we do have people like Renee who are out in the streets warning their neighbors of these masked secret police on the prowl. And we have other things happening. You know, I have a friend, I mean, these ICE agents, they left a 7-year-old child. This was weeks ago. They broke down a door, an apartment door, and took parents and left a 7-year-old child alone in an apartment. Okay. I have a friend who's a handyman, and he went out and he fixed the door. People are, you know, we had Greg Bovino and his shock troops go at high school dismissal time the same day that they went directly from the site of an execution of Renee Good. What they did next, they went to a high school at dismissal time and maced everyone. Okay, we have people who are ensuring that our schools have been closed since then. Okay. Because of actions of the federal government, our children in my community have not been able to go to school, to get their education and to make sense of this moment, right? But what we have in our community is people ensuring that our kids can get in and out of school. We have people ensuring that folks can go to work, that they have what they need. And so there is a role for everyone in this movement. There is a role for everyone to step up in this time. And if you're in Minneapolis, Defend the 612 is a way to link up. You can find it on Instagram or on the internet. It's a way to link up with your local community defense and rapid response. And these are just regular people organizing themselves. You know, my block has a little WhatsApp chat, and we just, if a neighbor needs groceries or if there's something funny, then we just talk to each other and we try to go and address it, because you know, we are just completely overwhelmed. I mean, it's hard to express. Like, I can hear the helicopters above me right now. It feels like we are a community under siege, and we have an obligation to respond.
But Minneapolis is responding in a way that is peaceful and is well within everybody's rights to respond. So thank you for this. Minnesota State Representative Aisha Gomez joining me from Minneapolis.
Growing tensions in the Middle East today. Iran warns it will target U.S. troops and Israel if it is attacked by the United States, as Tehran intensifies its crackdown on anti-government protests, now entering their 3rd week. U.S. officials tell the Wall Street Journal that Donald Trump is scheduled to be briefed Tuesday on options to respond to the protests. As the New York Times reports, the president has been briefed in recent days on new options for military strikes and is seriously considering intervening. This, according to multiple U.S. officials familiar with the matter. He has not made a final decision, though. Lawmakers are split on the wisdom of such a move.
The president has made it very clear that if they begin to kill their own people and slaughter them, that the United States will be forced to interfere at that point. And I would back the president in having that strategy of protecting the Iranian people from the right to restore their country to what it used to be in the 1970s.
I don't think it's the job of the American government to be involved with every freedom movement around the world.
There's considerable risk that Trump is going to drag us into a war in Iran, thinking that he can just force his will upon them as well. And then we're in another Middle East quagmire.
And joining me now, John Gambrell, Gulf and Iran news director for the Associated Press, who has been reporting on this from Dubai. John, welcome to you. What is your sense of the situation there in Iran today? We know the death toll has been rising. I'd like to get the numbers as of now and talk about how hard it even is to get information relayed and confirmed, because the regime has shut off internet access and international calls are now blocked in Iran.
Alex, it's a really complicated situation. We typically work with our colleagues in Tehran who assist us in the reporting, but we can't reach them. The phone lines are cut, as you mentioned. The internet is down. So we're having to rely a lot on activists who are operating inside of Iran using Starlink satellite receivers. There is one activist group in particular that's been very successful. That's the Human Rights Activist News Agency, which today has said that at least 536 people have been killed so far in these demonstrations, and they warned that this number is likely to go much, much higher up. And the reason for that is just the amount of violence that we've seen surrounding these protests. There's been gunshots that have been heard in some of these online videos. We've seen videos of bodies as well. But again, it's very, very difficult to understand exactly what's happening there. The Associated Press itself is not able to independently assess any of these casualty figures. And complicating matters is the fact that the Iranian government has released no figures about protesters. In fact, they have turned their language on state media into calling them rioters and have focused primarily on the death of security officials, meaning there's a real gap here in the knowledge, and Iran is trying to really show a strong, united front, even though that's belayed by the protests we've seen on the street. Alex?
Okay, so John, I'm curious your thoughts on how seriously we should be taking these warnings from both sides. As reported, leading into you, we know that the president has been briefed on military options that he could consider. We know that he is going to have a meeting on Tuesday to discuss where things stand, what to do. So how high do you sense the risk is of U.S. strikes exacerbating the problems in Iran and the wider region?
Well, I know exactly how the Iranians feel because we saw the Iranian parliament meet today, and the speaker of the parliament, Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf, came out very strongly and said that if there's any U.S. strike on Iran to try to protect or defend peaceful protesters, he said that Iran would be willing to strike at Israel or any of the U.S. military bases or personnel that are throughout the Middle East. There's a lot of bases here. You have them in Qatar, the air base there that Iran struck back in June. And then you also have the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain as well. So there's a lot of targets there, and the Iranians, through Kalibaf today, even suggested that they could do a preemptive strike. That being said, the Iranians are in a tight spot right now. Their air defensives were destroyed during that war in June launched by Israel that lasted for 12 days and saw the United States strike Iranian nuclear sites as well. But on the American side, there's risks. Do they want to take the chance of potentially restarting a regional war that Trump was very proud to have said that he got the ceasefire on? Now, our own AP staff at the White House have confirmed through two officials that there's discussions right now about potentially cyber options all the way up to military strikes. But again, it's just unclear what President Trump is ultimately going to decide.